balls out.
Slurs, rumors, innuendo.
And everybody's looking forward to this episode, obviously.
Obviously. Hell yeah.
Man, I already see Bob, I see Shannon. Man, this is going to be a fun one. I think we got two great topics tonight.
And really, truthfully, I think we can sum the first one up in like a 5 to 8 minute conversation, and that's the death of hair metal. And it didn't come; it wasn't a gradual thing. Hair metal was still doing all right, but obviously Nirvana showed numbers that the record industry said it's time to shift gears here, and they just did it like from one day to the next.
Nirvana was expected to, and quite frankly, that when they first dropped and Geffen signed them, they were expected to turn numbers into the realm of, 200,000 would have been a really, really wild success for them for that first album.
Right.
Typically in that era, anything under 60,000, and there was a good chance, not a great chance, but there was a pretty good chance you may not get invited back, or you only get one more album. And typically, if you didn't do anything better on that second run, then that was it. That's all you got.
Well, I really want to talk about the death of hair metal because I was not a fan of hair metal. And I feel the record companies totally misinterpreted the success of the early 80s power metal albums that ruled that era, which were Blizzard of Oz, Diary of a Madman, Screaming for Vengeance, Number of the Beast, Peace of Mind, Holy Diver, Defenders of the Faith. Those were, those albums ruled that era. Even Power Slave, and they totally misinterpreted the success of those albums.
Oh my God, they did.
And then put out the hair bands, and they're not related in any way.
Man, I'm surprised you left out two really, 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 really great albums of that era too, and that was that were also really big movers. And that was actually in the history between these two bands too. And that would have been Megadeth and Metallica's "And Justice for All." Megadeth,
but they hadn't made it as of the early '80s, right? It wasn't until '85 or '86 that Metallica really.
Yeah, that was 1987, I believe, wasn't it? When "And Justice for All" came out. Of course,
Master of Puppets was the first. I mean, now even though the Metallica albums that preceded were great, the actual blooming of Metallica happened on Master of Puppets.
Yeah, that's when I think everybody really that wasn't part of the LA scene really started taking notice of Metallica was that album. It was
I consider it one of the five greatest. I consider it one of the five greatest metal albums of all time.
Now there is something here is that some of these bands got lumped in with the hair bands. Dio got shuffled out. Several of them did, but Metallica and Megadeth cruised right through it.
That's because
I look at like the big four: Metallica, Megadeth, Slayer, and I think Anthrax is in the big four. They're more thrash.
Yeah, those are thrash acts, right? I mean, the power metal acts were Dio, Ozzy, Maiden, Judas Priest, Wasp, Accept.
But they all kind of got the axe with the death of hair metal.
Well, not really. I mean, Metallica had their greatest commercial success in 1990.
No. I'm not talking about Metallica.
Now, I'm
talking about the ones he named as power metal.
Now, Judas Priest came out with Painkiller in 90 or 91, and it's
a big seller. Yeah,
that was a huge seller and an all-time metal epic, and it proved that people were still hungry for real metal, right? But they didn't want people posing around on stage with makeup on, right, singing ballads and then putting distortion to it, right?
Bob hit the nail on the head. Hair metal was manufactured music, and if we've ever seen anything in music, it may have a nice little bubble and it's very profitable, but it ends badly. And I often find a lot of glam metal and that hair metal very much like the disco era. You had a bunch of acts who came on. It was easy to manufacture. MTV was feeding it through Headbangers Ball. They had the videos. I mean, when you listen to a lot of these hair metals, the songs are all like cookie cutter. You have the start of the video where you have the chick, you have the good-looking band, you have the vocal solo.
Fast car, you got to have a fast car.
Yeah, fast car, you have a chorus, you have either a guitar solo or drum solo.
Now here's another aspect. Just like punk, when metal becomes mainstream, it's no longer considered legitimate, right? So when you make metal, which is something that's inherently underground, mainstream, right? It no longer.
That's pretty much everything, isn't it?
Yeah, but punk and metal is which has always been at war with each other. I urge people to see the movie SLC Punk so they can see what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But I lived
good.
that era, right? And there was a war between punk and metal, and both of them were out to kill new wave and disco. And they did do it. They ended new wave and disco. Now, guys, I got to ask you: have you ever seen a Tears for Fears concert shirt in your life?
Hold on 1 second. We got to address this. Shannon, tell them about disco.
Disco's not dead.
Yeah, but it did die then. It just kind of creeped back up, right?
No, it didn't really die. It's just like pretty much just about every genre. It just it kind of fell out of favor for a minute because this new flavor came about.
Well,
Which is
exactly.
it's really funny because that where this is also that, and I hate that we're not even going to start the grunge conversation because this is a great segue into how what we're talking about, how it ended. And when it finally ended in grunge, which was it was such an anomaly that it became as successful and popular as it did.
I mean, you do have to admit though that the people who were commanding disco at the time just kind of fell to the wayside, except for Blondie. Blondie was actually considered disco, or at least Heart of Glass was.
Well, they were considered punk before then, though.
They were.
That's true story.
Yeah.
Bee Gees continued to record music stuff until the early 2000s. So
But once they seen that it was not going well, the disco moniker was harming album sales. They just called it new wave.
And I know that Kiss fans were really relieved when that happened too, because they didn't want to have to endure another disco album.
Kiss was going down. Disco could have fucking survived, and Kiss was still going down because they had lost
in the 80s.
So we lost now. So if we was talking about the video to Subdivision, right? And there was a latchkey generation which I was part of, right? And that latchkey generation, I think by the late 80s, early 90s became disenfranchised, and they were angry, right? And I think that the fighting wizards and demons wasn't enough for them, right? They wanted to talk about their parents, about school, about everything that sucked in their life, and I think that's where grunge really got its foot.
Yeah, that's literally the genesis of the genre. But Doug, get back to your band.
Y'all know, and well, maybe not you, Kyle, and I know Doug doesn't, but I know for a fact that Bob Arthur's going to know what I'm saying right here. You know when you've been staying up and doing cocaine all night long, you finally run out of cocaine, you finally run out of money, and you just have to try to lay there and kind of go to sleep. That's kind of what happened with the 90s. All of the 80s excess and all of the overblown, hair metal embodied that. Probably no finer than any other genre.
And that's when you're staring at the ceiling, right? And wondering about the next thing. You know what I'm saying?
And you feel so bad about doing that much blow to begin with, and you start really hating yourself. And bam, that's what I'm saying. Grunge really epitomized that whole 80s come down.
And that's where I come home from the Gulf War too, was the grunge explosion. And I got to admit that I loved Nirvana and I hated the hair bands, guys. I cannot emphasize enough.
The hair bands are like fake metal. It's like going back to Doug, what I was going to say is Kiss was an 80s hair metal band to a T with Vinnie Vincent, Bruce Kulick, and Eric Carr. That was as 80s. That's as hair metal as you can get. And even Kiss knew that they couldn't continue writing that shit. And that's where an album.
Heaven's on Fire. Oh man, I'll never forget that song.
Oh, my band in Okeechobee, Chaos with Paul Clay and Jody Fadley. We played that song, right? I was the drummer on it.
I like that song.
Yeah, no.
I'm not gonna shit on it.
I hate that fucking song.
I don't. I'm not gonna shit on it.
I hate everything from. I mean, I like Someone Lick It Up, and then it just everything from then on really sucked.
Yeah, Lick It Up had moments that I really liked, like Not for the Innocent was a.
Yeah. Now a lot of people will hail Revenge as like some major Kiss comeback or whatever, and they had the song Unholy, and if you remember, Shannon, Ron was like mouth-watering over that song.
Yeah.
But it's really cookie cutter. It's really not. I mean, it was just hard it was hard edge for Kiss, but it really, there was not much to it.
It was well produced, though.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that was.
They could afford that sort of thing.
Yeah, the other element to the hair metal decline in the 80s into the 90s too is a lot of the big bands lost a lot of key members. Vince Neil left Motley Crue, Poison lost CC DeVille, Def Leppard lost Steve Clark, Izzy
Well, Steve Clark
Stradlin.
died, so
Yeah, I mean,
Queen's
there's a whole litany there. So when you start losing a lot of the foundation of it. I'm sorry, an act like Warrant, an act like, Poison, they're not strong enough to carry the flag. Really wasn't a good flag bearer of that genre.
I will say this about Warrant, and this is something I've discovered in the last 10 years or so. And I remember thinking, Janie Lane, he copies Brett Michael or whatever. But you listen to Janie Lane, he's dead, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
When did Janie Lane die?
about 4 or 5 years ago, wasn't it? Maybe 10.
Yeah, maybe 10. Shit, it's been a while. He was a way better singer than Brett Michaels. Warrant was still a turd, but he was still he was one of the best singers out of that era.
All you have to know is that, the guys that were not cool that come over to Beavis and Butthead Shed, the guys that were not cool were wearing Winger and Poison shirts, right?
Yep.
Well, it kills me too that Winger, who got his start playing bass for Alice Cooper, and this was during his glory years.
Alice Cooper's though, he's got such a storied past. It's like everything that Alice Cooper has touched has not turned to gold. I assure you. Kip
Winger was involved during his glory years, $1 Billion Babies, and then around that era.
Oh yeah.
So I mean, for him to be involved in that iconic of a project,
he was kind of like a session guy that basically went on tour.
Hey! At the same time, it's still though that's where he cut his teeth, and then.
No, I love Alice Cooper, but Alice Cooper has more shit in his catalog than he's got.
Oh yeah. There's some big old, especially when we talk about the '90s. Getting clean and sober doesn't work great for everybody as far as musical output goes.
Poison was the last thing he did. It was good.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever seen his wife? Have you ever seen Alice Cooper's wife?
Was that her on the car show with him with the gigantic fake titties and stuff?
Probably so, but she's like a church minister and has been for like 30 years now.
Oh, I knew that Alice Cooper's actually religious.
Oh no, yeah, but his wife is like that's her job.
She's more religious than he is.
Yeah. Very involved in the women's ministry.
Oh yeah.
I don't know. Alice Cooper. I mean, I'm either in love with it or I'm like, what the fuck? What the fuck was this shit?
He took chances though.
Them old the old first 4 or 5 albums? No man.
There's some genius shit in there.
God.
Oh yeah.
They're out.
Oh yeah, I gotta admit it. If he'd had a decent guitar player on his first 4 albums, it would have been off the hook.
Everybody grab your balls. It's balls out, slurs, rumors, and innuendo.
2 words. Cherry pie.
I know you got thoughts on this, Kyle.
Again, anytime music becomes manufactured, there's always that groundswell that leads for a very abrupt ending. We saw that with grunge. We saw that with the punk movement. We saw that in everything. While it didn't die exactly when Teen Spirit came out on MTV, and it was much of a gradual death through the 90s, it's become, it became more, there was a giant de-emphasis, and I don't think the genre has ever recovered. I don't think it'll ever recover. I think there will always be a niche for it, but I don't think, I think it had its time, and I just, like I said, there's a feel good to it where it's like, it's very simple, something you can get behind, you can get pumped up with it, but ultimately at the end of the day, when it comes to serious music and people wanting that sort of tone. Hair metal, glam metal, whatever you want to call it, is never going to fulfill that.
And they also had rap. Now, the initial surge of rap, the popularity of it bit into hair metal and it laid the seeds, but the death of hair metal didn't make rap popular. The rise of grunge made rap popular because it was so depressing.
Well, then it was grunge cannibalizing itself that enabled rap to take the baton.
And we also have old country over in the corner too that also began to make a national emergence roughly around the same time.
Yep.
Guys like Garth Brooks and Miss Shania Twain broke into the mainstream and sold all of these millions and millions of albums to people that have never ever had any interest in country music.
Billy Ray Cyrus from right here.
And another genre that did it too was Britpop. Blur versus Oasis became a big deal in the mid.
And we're not going to have a Britpop conversation without bringing SM Gibson on this podcast. I gotta stop because he'll start screaming at me. He's probably screaming. If he's going to listen to this, he'll start screaming. No, don't do it. I want on.
Well, the album that was the requiem for hair metal would have been Queensryche Empire, right? And it fades nicely into the Britpop, especially Oasis. The feeling of it.
It really does, and I mean, that's a really good segue for those. But one thing that we have not talked about is that maybe hair metal was kind of pushed by the industry so hard when it was to bring the girls to these metal shows and to actually cement a female market in the middle of this uprising, that happened in the early to mid 80s.
Iron Maiden was a sausage fest, guys. When you went and seen the Iron Maiden Judas Priest double bill in 1982, it was a sausage
Nothing
fest.
but dudes. The only chicks that were there were with their boyfriends.
But then you look in the late 90s, the anger, the metal that took place was like new metal. So you had like things like Korn and Limp Bizkit and shit like that that kind of started to come more to the forefront, that I don't know would be kind of that successor to the metal genre. So
they got too extreme though for the casual power metal fan that would have listened to Man on the Silver Mountain. Some of those bands like Sepultura and Slayer and Sodom and that kind of thing were too much. They got too extreme in response to hair metal. Metal also changed because of hair metal. Now, if you were metal, you didn't want to be associated with it. So you had to get harder, and you had to drop C and drop B and go rah, 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 like that right there, right? Instead of so the whole genre of metal changed.
Do that vocal thing again.
It'll probably hurt me. I'm gonna have to get ready for it. It's called rah, 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 rah.
I like that. I've never heard that before, but I like it.
You did. You heard it. You've heard it on Sesame Street a bunch of times.
You okay, Bob? We done killed Bob.
It was tough on me, man.
All right.
That sounded rough.
Well, hey, Kyle, you try it. You ain't gonna do it, are you?
And I'm more like a Brad Delp. Oh, there you go. I'm more like a Brad Delp kind of Jolie and Turner kind of singer,
Yeah, well, that's rough. You got to work your way into it.
Oh yeah, but I smoked a lot of cigarettes. I can get pretty low.
Oh, I can't.
Whiskey helps you achieve that death metal growl that you crave.
Oh yeah, it'll get you up to Robert Plant territory too.
Yeah.
Or at least you'll think you're there.
All right, so let's so out goes hair metal, and in comes grunge.
Yes.
Let's talk about it.
4-way match.
The grunge thing really started. I guess your shot across the bow would have been, of course, Mudhoney's famous single "Touch Me, I'm Sick," which is was released on Sub Pop in their very, 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 very early years of Sub Pop. Sub Pop started off as a little tiny mom and pop record store slash record label there in Seattle, and it was just really to kind of showcase local bands and help them play more gigs there in the area, in a back and forth between Seattle, Olympia, and of course down into Portland and those college towns down there. And then of course Alice in Chains got signed and released Faceless.
You got to bring up Mother Love Bone. in the
Well,
same vein.
well, no. We're still pre-Mother Love Bone when we talk about Mudhoney.
Because
When we talk about
you're talking like 86, 87.
yeah, because again, Green River was still a band at that time. Mother Love Bone was not in existence
Yeah,
yet. Mother Love Bone got signed, I believe, in 80, maybe early 89.
I'm thinking 88.
It might have been 88.
It's in that, we're in the same range.
Alice in Chains beat him to punch with Facelift. Of course, Man in the Box became a rock radio staple at the time because it was a very unusual sounding rock. It wasn't something that it had shades and elements of stuff we've heard before, but there was a little something there that was darker and sinister and came from a really, really, really good place.
It was, you just had this mecca of Seattle bands that were like, no one heard this before. And I mean, like I said, for me, I was super, super young when Teen Spirit came out. I was like 6 or 7. But I just remember that being like, wow, that was different. Now, I can only imagine what you guys felt when you saw that and kind of lived the time.
Oh yeah, well I found it very interesting because I was done with hair metal stuff altogether. When it came out, I was done. When Motley Crue put out what was the album that had Smoking in the Boys' Room? Theater of Pain. I was done with it, right? And same thing on Rat. Even though it was a great album, Rat, the one after Out of the Cellar, piece. Anyway, the one that had Lay It Down and all that.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, that was kind of like the beginning and the end. I'm like, well, man, that's not that cool. But then you hear Alice in Chains sounds completely different. But you know what made the scene possible was the success of Queensryche. Queensryche came out with Rage for Order, which was something completely different that really couldn't be classified. And then they backed it up with the concept album, Operation Mindcrime, and people started looking at Seattle bands. And next thing you know, you have Alice in Chains, and it's
particularly because they had a very, very vibrant rock scene. Of course, the Melvins had already been releasing a few albums underground, and people were starting to take notice of that as well.
Oh, the Melvins were killer, man.
And a lot of people will tell you, particularly people from that region, the Melvins. A lot of people will cite other bands from that era as the prime motivator. But everybody wanted to be the Melvins at that.
Now, what really broke it for me was Temple of the Dog. When that was the new thing.
That was a nice little offshoot there.
Yeah, and I come back.
Temple of the Dog was amazing, man. That was a great record.
What was it? Half Pearl Jam and half Soundgarden.
Yeah, and that's really, I heard it before I heard Nirvana, and then I was like, what the hell is this? But it's good, It reminded me of U2 on steroids. That was dark.
I will never forget. I was living in Orlando at my grandfather's at the time when Nevermind dropped. And the kid that was on there was so pissed off that now suddenly the record industry came and stole their little, their little darling Nirvana that, sold a couple thousand copies of Bleach at that time. And they just happened to be playing in a place that Kim Gordon from Sonic Youth, I got folks shooting fireworks off out here. Yeah, they still going. And now they're, I think they're buy 3, get 9 free or something like that now, too. They're trying to get rid of all the rest of them, so I'm sure we'll have some fireworks for the next month and a half. But no, I'm trying to remember where I was going. Yeah, this kid was really just really, really, really just agitated. He goes off for several minutes about this band that I'd never heard of. I'd never heard of Nirvana. And then he goes and puts on Smells Like Teen Spirit. And I listened to this song, and quite frankly, the first time I heard it, I was like, okay, that's okay. I wasn't really blown away by it. But then again, I also came at it from a really, really, really different place than a lot of other people did. When hair metal were going on, I lived in a pretty religious household, and there was a lot of things that we weren't allowed to listen to. And if we did listen to it, it had to be at friends' houses or on unlabeled cassettes, or it was a very sneaky situation there. So there was a lot of stuff that, that kids were getting into at that particular point in time that I just wasn't being.
Journey into Rock. Shannon, have you heard of Journey into Rock?
By
what that was the thing the Baptist Church put out in the 80s. that talked about backwards masting and what was satanic and what wasn't and so forth, right?
Heard that. I never heard that specifically as far as the Journey to Rock thing, but I definitely sat through a lot of those satanic panic kind of
Oh yeah.
in the late 80s, early 90s. That's when they really started gaining a lot of popularity.
So a friend of mine had a car wreck, and I had to make him blank cassette that had Blizzard of Oz on one side and Diary of a Madman on the other because his dad was a minister. He would have thrown it away, you know. When I seen the actual CD of Nirvana and I bought it, Nevermind, it had a Parents Anniversary lyrics sticker on it. Therefore, I wanted it.
Oh, absolutely. That helped sell a lot of albums.
Oh yeah.
That's how you knew what you wanted.
Two Live Crew. That's why we bought Two Live Crew. That's why.
Oh, I love Two Live Crew.
Hell yeah. I know places down there two streets. They don't ask you no questions and they give you clean seats. Welcome to the fuck side. Yeah.
Me so horny.
Man, that was the bomb.
Hey,
That
I put that
whole
on the intercoms in Germany. We was on a communications site in the middle of nowhere, and it was a radio relay. So I patched it in, so everybody that was connected to that network had to hear Me So Horny. You know.
Have you listened to that album recently? The whole album?
I've got it. I should break it out.
It's not aged well.
I've actually got Luke Skywalker.
Oh, Luke. What was the album they did after that? Band in the U.S.
That's the one. That's the one.
All right, so let's get back to grunge, guys.
Grunge.
So we were talking about Team Spirit, and it had so much energy. I think it was so dark and it was so cheeky. I think that's always been a good element for success.
But the thing is that Nirvana did have a sense of humor that was really, really not prevalent among a lot of their contemporaries. There was, even though it was a dark sense of humor, there was still a lot of wit and a lot of humor on those records. And I don't know, man. It's so ironic that situation ended the way that it did.
And he purposely played shit gear, right, and somehow made it work, right. And a lot of people, they talk about Kurt Cobain. Nobody talks about him as a great guitarist, but I'm gonna give him a little bit of credit. He played a Sun PA head, right, and one of the worst possible guitars you can have for rock and roll, a Jazz Master that somebody had fiddled with, and somehow made a genre defining sound with it, right? I mean, even if he wasn't Eddie Van Halen, you know exactly who it was when he opened up, man.
Now, I will say this, though. It was very fortuitous that particular album had Butch Vig behind the knobs, because Butch was coming off a major win with being involved with My Bloody Valentine's Loveless, which is still to this day considered a very seminal guitar rock album, because there's so many different sounds on there that just did not exist until Ben Shields got in the studio up there with Butch.
Little known fact: my stepbrother-in-law, who got a degree from the Berkeley School of Music, worked with Butch Vig for a lot of the into the mid '90s. So I don't know if he worked on a Nirvana album, but he did work closely with Butch. That's a little known fact. And then
let's see, Nirvana recorded Nevermind. I believe it was in '91, correct? Or was it released in '91?
I think it was released in '91.
I think they recorded it through '90 and released it early '91.
Yeah, I think you're right on that.
But dude, Shannon, to dovetail off of the Nirvana wit, to me, that is very well on display in their music video in Bloom. That always gets me into stitches rather quickly.
I love that song.
Whenever you watch a music video, they pretend to be, a 50s musical act, and it's just so funny.
I mean, it's 50s or 60s. It's really hard to know.
You made me think of, there was a guy, we had a big family gathering. There was a guy in my house yesterday, about 16 years old, that had some kind of Confederate flag hat, right? And I'm sitting there thinking, In Bloom, right? The whole sentiment of In Bloom is that you don't even know why or what you're doing, right? You're just doing it. You know what I'm saying?
There's so many great pop hooks on that album too. I mean, really, that's really, I think that's where he was able to kind of score the win there, was to be able to create this, beautiful, frustrating music, and also throw a lot of you listen to it pretty hard, and there's a little cheap trick here, and there's a little, Kurt Cobain was famously a fan of the Knack. Remember My Sharona?
Yep.
Oh yeah, I was going to bring that up earlier. How My Sharona had tried to have that energy that Nirvana had years earlier, and Rolling Stone magazine picked them to be so big, and they were right about the energy of it, but not that band. They were just 10 years too early and not the same.
Yeah, and Kurt was still all over that band. He was like, man, no, seriously, y'all overlooked one of the greatest musical acts. And when he said it to people, they were like, are you serious? You don't play any music anything like them. And he was like, I'm dead serious. And then you listen to his music, and there are little bits and pieces in there. It's a smorgasbord of pop history.
Yeah.
Throughout all of those little quirky chord changes and awkward turns that he made. And I'm going to tell you what, man, In Utero is still an amazing album. I listened to that the other day. Steve Albini's production on that album.
Oh yeah.
Chef's
I love In Utero.
Those drums. If Dave Grohl, everybody can say what they want to about Dave Grohl circa 2023. But on that particular album, I think even more so than Nevermind, he presents himself as one of the premier rock drummers.
100%. Yeah. It was one of those records I sought after. I'm happy to have it in my collection, and when I spin it, I'm a happy guy. So we would be remiss if we didn't at this point bring up the obvious grunge beef of the 90s. Nirvana versus Pearl Jam. That's as big of a music beef as there ever was, and
I don't know. I think that had more to do with the fact too that Kurt, he had a few.
It was definitely all one-sided on Kurt. His issues. Eddie was kind of cool about things.
Eddie's always been cool about things. And, everybody can talk shit about Pearl Jam all they want to, but name one time that Eddie Vedder's been the news for something negative.
Yeah, never.
I mean, seriously, you talk about such a group of really, really, really cool guys. I think the worst thing that the problem they ever had was Mike McCready admitted he had some sort of a problem that he smoked too much pot or something. Vitality has some amazing stuff on it.
In Pearl Jam, they kind of, in a lot of ways, they were truly, they fought Ticketmaster. They weren't afraid to. I think part of the reason grunge would eventually die, outside of whatever happened to Kurt Cobain, which we'll probably have our conspiracy theorists.
Oh yeah, I think his old lady killed him.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a bit. But they weren't afraid. They didn't want to be pigeonholed squarely in grunge. So I think that hurt the genre. But they were fighting Ticketmaster. They just grew as a band. And like I said, I know you guys are all fascinated by sales metrics, but 10 has outsold Nevermind in the U.S. We need to just make sure we bring that up. And it was named, you can always remember, it's named after Mookie Blaylock's jersey number. So
in the U.S., but how about worldwide?
I think it's even worldwide, too. I know it's at least certified, I think either 13 or 15x platinum in the U.S. The world.
And Mookie Blaylock, that was actually their working band
title,
name
yes,
for a while. Mookie Blaylock, yeah. Huge basketball fans.
They were, and they still are. Between basketball and baseball, their affinity for playing baseball stadiums, nuts. They just were, in my opinion, when I listened to their music, the first Pearl Jam song I heard wasn't from 10 or Vitality or Versus. It was from this Indio, California tape. And the song was called Fuck Me in the Brain. And I just remember how visceral Eddie was. I'm like, whoever the fuck this is, I absolutely love. Um, and that's how my love of Pearl Jam came to be. And throughout school, I was a giant Pearl Jam fan. I the ups and downs and whatnot. So, yeah, it's up there for me. So I just like I said, I always firmly believe with Pearl Jam. Like, I know everyone hails the Nirvana MTV Unplugged because of the eeriness and what eventually happened to Kurt, but Pearl Jam's MTV Unplugged is just as good. If you gotta, if you haven't listened,
Let's go ahead and get something straight though. Musically, no, it's a bit better. It's like way better actually.
I know, but all apologies as played unplugged made me understand what I needed to sing and play for my dad, right? That I wasn't the president of the United States, that I wasn't everything that he wanted me to be. So I sang that song to my dad, right? I played that song for him, right?
Did he get up and punch you in the face afterwards?
Well, we had that kind of relationship, so anything could have happened.
You don't want to talk about it? I
Yeah.
understand. I understand.
I mean, that show, I think it was early '92, and I literally walked over to my record shelf and pulled off the record store day release from a few years ago where they released it on vinyl. I mean, this was like down right before Christmas, and like there's this. It's just so phenomenal. I can't even give the words. It's an amazing, amazing release.
I was too shallow for Pearl Jam, guys, back then. You know the truth of it? I watched I'm sorry, Doug. What's that?
Go ahead.
I watched, you ever seen the Doors live at Hollywood Bowl where Jim Morrison sees a butterfly? Yes, and he sees a butterfly and he goes on a little segue about it.
I think it was a cricket.
Yeah, he actually said it was a cricket. At first he thought it was a butterfly, and then he said it was a cricket. Well, I'm watching, this is what killed me on Pearl Jam. I'm watching Saturday Night Live in the early 90s, and Pearl was on there, and they're rocking, and I loved Even Flow and a couple other songs. I thought Daughter was a work of art. Anyway, and I'm watching this, and he starts imitating Jim Morrison exactly as he was at Hollywood Bowl. And I was like, man, that's so derivative. You don't need to do that, man. And I never have loved Pearl Jam since then.
I never did love Pearl Jam. I don't know why, if they weren't dark enough. And I'm not saying they may be the biggest selling of the grunge bands, and I'm not going to try to dispute that. And they very well may be. But for some reason, Pearl Jam was always way down my list.
They're the only ones that are still touring, though, as far as I know. Out of all of the,
no, absolutely.
I think Alice in Chains has still got something going on, but I don't even know if they call it Alice in Chains anymore.
I think they still call it that, but I don't.
Lead singer is good, man. He's a hell of a guitarist too, and he's got great tone. He compliments the remaining members well, but I mean, you can't never. It's hard to replace a guy, man. I mean, the only guy that's really ever done it has been Brian Johnson.
Well, at the same time, that particular band, and look, I love Wayne Stanley, loved his vocals, but at the same time, the heart of the band has always been Jerry Cantrell.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we already know that Kyle's favorite grunge band is Pearl Jam.
Nobody has said a single word about Soundgarden. Because, Soundgarden came out almost exactly, as far as on a major label, came out exactly after Alice in Chains did. The one that came out before Bad Motorfinger, Louder Than Love. Mm-hmm. It sold okay. It wasn't anything to write home about. But when Bad Motorfinger came out, which was about the same time that Nevermind dropped, that album, and of course, those are two completely different sounding albums. There's a lot more of your old classic metal that goes back to Black Sabbath and a lot of those Soundgarden riffs.
Absolutely.
Kim Thile just fucking tears it up, man.
Black Day's a hell of a song. Black Day is fucking immense tune, man.
Did in a commercial kind of sense, did who am I thinking of? The band that did Epic.
Oh yeah, you talk
Faith
about
No More.
Did they kind of lead us into
You
this?
brought up Courtney Love a little while ago. Does anybody know who Faith No More's very first vocalist was?
Really?
Yes, it sure was Courtney Love.
Wow, I did not know that.
Yeah.
Before they went with the fella that did Introduce Yourself, Chuck Mosley.
Oh yeah. So Soundgarden they was very big, especially in the mid '90s. They he was a great singer, and I thought it was pretty good. Spoonman was all right, but they played it too much.
They just kind of had a weird Sabbath Zeppelin thing going.
Yes, they did.
And even though, I mean, they really didn't sound like either of those bands, but they did have those elements.
None of the bands we brought up were covered by Johnny Cash except for Soundgarden. Go ahead. Gonna break my rusty cage.
Oh yeah, that's a great song.
So
Yeah,
I'm gonna go ahead.
It's got the Heartbreakers backing him up on it too, man. That's a great tune. That Cash version of Rusty Cage, yeah.
I'm going to say that Kyle's second favorite grunge band is Stone Temple Pilots.
Fuck no. Those pieces of shit can go rotten.
Oh, whoa.
That is my favorite. That's my favorite from the era. I swear to God.
Here we go. Now let's Leo. Let's
What you
talk.
don't like about them?
Now let's welcome to the segment of the show talking shit with Kyle Gowick.
There you go. Oh my God. These guys, Stone Temple Pilots were the biggest effing posers. Like between them and Smashing Pumpkins, I don't have anything nice to say about them. I just feel like with STP, they're just they try to be good lyricists. They try to be Led Zeppelin. They try, like, I think it was one of the DeLeo brothers said they were trying to write an album like Led Zeppelin, and that you just listen to the whole thing through, and you listen to the whole thing through, and you're like, the fuck is this shit? And you just whip it out of your CD player and just fling it somewhere. They're just trash. Like, I'm sorry, I got nothing to say about either STP or Smashing Pumpkins.
I don't care much for Smashing Pumpkins, but
I don't know.
STP
The first two albums, Gish and Siamese Dream are pretty good albums.
The people went nuts for them during this record revival. I literally muted those people on my Facebook and said, "Look, I don't need that sort of shit in my life." That was like an easy filter for me.
If you ever really loved or have a genuine like for Smashing Pumpkins, I encourage you to go do 2 hits of acid and listen to Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness and not laugh. If you can get through that album and not laugh, then you're okay.
My wife loves the Smashing Pumpkins, and she doesn't understand my strong.
She does. She's never done acid before, has she?
I actually hate that album, but I love the song Today. Right, and then as far as STP goes, there was one. Was it Cold Girl or something like that? It was like a acoustic song. I love that song. And anyway, I think STP was what Pearl Jam would have been if they had continued playing rock and roll after 10, right? Instead of going off on an artsy
If I wanted to listen to Pearl Jam, I'd listen to Pearl Jam. I don't need to listen to fake Pearl Jam and Stone Temple Pilots.
Oh yeah, and I was also impressed their use. So the Big Boom Baby, I think it's the album 4. If you watch that video, and also
Big Bang Baby, Big Bang Baby,
yeah, and
I tried so hard to. I tried when I was about 16 to like that CD, and I ended up just giving it away in school.
Now wait a minute, you don't like Purple? You, a music fan, don't like the Purple album? Because the Purple album was a really good album.
I thought it was good.
Not really. I did like Core, Purple. What was
Core and Purple, but that's the thing though, is that Core and Purple are 2 vastly different albums.
They are. I just didn't. There was no feel for STP for me. For me, it just felt forced. So
who was the 90s?
Well, you're a fucking Steely Dan.
I didn't really like I didn't like the first thing that they dropped. And what was the name of the hit single?
Still Remains.
No, not
Sex Type Thing. Sex Type Thing. Or Plush.
Yeah, what was the first one they dropped?
Down.
So
I mean, I thought Blush sounded a lot like grunge, but in the end, they really didn't sound a lot like grunge.
To me, the grunge movement's 4 bands. It goes in this 4 order. And it's not that, and I'm going to preface this, I love all 4 in different ways. So it's not like the gap between each 4 isn't much, but this is my 4. Pearl Jam at 1, Soundgarden at 2, Alice in Chains at 3, Nirvana 4. That's to me grunge.
Can I bring one thing up though? If it weren't for the grunge movement and Radiohead dropping Creep when they did, I propose that Radiohead probably wouldn't have been able to make OK Computer, and they would have gotten dropped out.
I agree. I 100% agree.
I really do, because that song would not have gotten played. They were not that nobody in England knew who they were. They just happened to be in the right place at the right time and got signed to a development deal, produced the right song at the right time, and then veered off in a completely different direction altogether and made some of the most iconic music of the early 2000s.
I agree.
I have a question real quick. Make sure that everybody knows about this. Has anybody ever heard the comparisons between Karma Police and Sexy Sadie by the Beatles?
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's you can play the songs are interchangeable. There's a guy who played them in a bar. It's on YouTube, and he just went back and forth between the two. They're interchangeable.
I'll have to check that out.
Yeah,
I get that. Yeah, you got a really similar chord structure. Yeah, I until you pointed it out, no, I'd never thought about it, but yeah, I get it.
But anyway, I did not realize. I mean, I love Karma Police.
Radiohead is notorious for ripping bands off. That whole Optimistic on what is that, Kid A?
Yeah.
The song Optimistic, that whole progression is lifted straight from the band Can, from their album Ego Yasi, which is one of my favorite albums of that era. Recently, I'm a huge Can fan now. Tygo Mago, man, y'all get into that album. It's some good shit.
Man, I tried the videos that you've been putting out of the Lizard King and
King Gizzard and Lizard Wizard is my new favorite right now. I am all over that band.
My woman's in there listening to it right now. I can hear it on the other side of the wall. I introduced it to her earlier. I said, "This is life changing, right?" And what was that one? Catch the Smoke or whatever it was.
Yeah, Catching Smoke. Yeah,
I love the damn video. That was incredible.
Dude, but I mean, seriously, every song that I've listened to them do, and they cover just every genre you can possibly imagine in popular music over the past 50 or 60 years, and they do it with such ease and just, I mean, precision. It's sick. It's scary.
She's rocking it right now, man. Fucking, it's amazing.
It's some good shit.
She's got the Sansui world of buzzing in there.
Yeah.
All right, so we can pin down the death of disco in a particular year. We can pin down the death of hair metal in a particular year. Can we do this with grunge, or
yes?
Did it take a little longer?
What, 97?
I would say the death of grunge happened, I would say around 97. The first blow was Kurt Cobain's death. The second blow was when Pearl Jam decided to fight Ticketmaster and delayed the launch of Yield. I think it was either No Code or Yield. I can't remember which came first.
No Code.
No Code? Yeah. Okay. Remember, No Code wasn't really a grunge record. It was a really different record. It's a really good record. But when they decided to distance themselves from grunge, Cobain's death, SPP really was putting out shit at that point. Alice in Chains was just about done. I thought Soundgarden broke up by that point.
I think the biggest thing in rock then was when Page and Plant reunited for their Moroccan sound. That was
without John Paul Jones.
Right. So after the whole grunge thing, there was kind of a hybrid of grunge and hip hop with. Help me out some of these bands.
The new metal bands. You had the Limp Bizkits. You had the I believe that dropped in what, 98, 99?
Yep.
But what about Pantera, guys? Now Pantera, they were kind of the other direction that metal tried to go, and they had
Yeah.
tried to be a hair band.
So
they did.
Soundgarden broke up in 1997, so that's kind of fitting right in our timeline.
Well, how about Rage Against
Shannon,
the
are you shooting
Machine?
the cats?
Yeah.
That has nothing to do with anything.
The Rage Against the Machine
Fuck
kind
out
of
of my
broke
yard.
around that time. And Rage Against the Machine I found him very interesting. And I think of guitarists I've heard in my life who did something completely new and different. He's the fourth guy of my life that did something completely different. And what's that?
I'm going to put 1997 as our year because obviously with Pearl Jam on hiatus, Nirvana done, Soundgarden broke it up. And remember, Alice in Chains went on hiatus because Lane Staley's ex-fiance had died in late 1996. So they went on hiatus.
When did Sublime drop?
I think 95. I think
94, 95. Now they had an underground success with that first album, 40 Ounces of Freedom. That was a huge college rock album, and then of course they had the big breakthrough album, and then poor fellow passed.
And 311 was huge.
311. I was just thinking about them. I need something else.
But see, now we're talking about now we've got the other genres have started to seep in though. Now we've
The
got
alternative.
elements of ska and elements of various different other things that had nothing to do with the music that we're talking about.
Yeah, Britpop had become firm. You had Biggie versus Tupac and rap.
That I was fixing to bring that up because that was really at its zenith. That was I think 96, 97. Biggie was ruling the chart.
Everybody grab your balls. It's balls out. Slurs, rumors, and innuendo.
That's why I say by 1997, grunge is dead because your big Seattle Four are done. Mudhoney's irrelevant. Stone Temple Pilots were distancing themselves from it.
So you had bands that tried to come out.
And then you had those third wave bands. Bush was actually like your second wave band. And if you look at Bush's lyrical content, can anybody tell me what the fuck he's talking about?
He's on a trip, man.
In any of those songs, he's not really on a trip. There's nothing of any kind of meaningful anything. And I understand British folks tend to do that from time to time, but man, not in this day and age. That just ain't gonna fly no more.
Well, grunge had their own hair
When
band.
you're making studio magic and making studio wizardry, sure you can get away with it.
Hey, and there was the Australian version too, Silverchair.
Silverchair, yeah. Silverchair, that was they released a couple albums, and of course, that unfortunately you had a couple of those bands. Three Doors Down was another one.
What about Candlebox?
Candlebox, Canada's greatest import of that era.
And there was an acoustic grunge craze for a day or two.
Days of the New.
Days of the New.
Yeah, from Louisville, Kentucky. And another thing that was interesting is there were some bands that came out at the end of that to me were like the hair metal of grunge, right? Like Tonic. If you could only see the way, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and again, so what we started to see is the market adjust and try to get music that's a little bit more, in touch with your feminine side and try to bring the ladies out as well. And that's the one common thread that we've seen throughout these genres is there's always been some kind of attempt at market correction because again we understand now just the power of economics, the buying power that ladies have, and that can also coerce the man to take them to the they can,
you guys ever listen
coerce their friends to go with them. There's 4 or 5 of them going, and then they got to have the drinks at the stand and so on and so forth. And it's they're very powerful driving economic motivators.
Yeah, I mean, you look at that point, REM's sound has changed. Wilco's starting to become big. You got like the ska movement with the Mighty Mighty Boss Stones that would take shape in the late 90s.
No doubt.
That lasted, about a minute and a half?
Yeah.
So are we even doing this genre thing at this point? I mean, Are there any huge genres anymore except for rap or hip hop, or what we call
And
it?
even rap and hip hop is incorporating country and little shades of 80s pop and all sorts of other stuff. I mean, there's
I'm
not
not,
a
I'm not
genre.
sure we're going to see the death of genres anymore because genres aren't going to get popular enough to die.
There's too
Well,
many
they've just
genres.
all merged. They've just merged. All you listen to now, you turn over to the adult contemporary station, and the song has a certain bed behind it that sounds exactly like the song on the hip hop radio station has on it. That sounds like the song that the country song has on it, except the hip hop song has the usual flourishes and flares that you see in hip hop. The country song has a fiddle and a banjo and talking about pickup trucks. I mean, there's all this, all
So
of
what
this
you're saying is
merging.
it's becoming more assembly line across the board?
It is. It's put together on an assembly line. Everything is auto tuned to death. And then you put the fiddle on it if it's a country song. You put the bring the female guest vocalist and turn the bass up a little bit if it's an R&B tune. You know what I'm saying? I mean, there's only variations. All of the notes are the same. All of the the swells and the builds and the changes in the song. It's virtually it doesn't matter what station you turn to now. And it's so strange, and it's also cool because it's also easier for when somebody new and fresh comes to the fold, like King Gizzard a moment ago. Those bands pop up and they stick out like a sore thumb.
Well, that's true with really any era of music, and popular music at its core, no matter if you're back in the '60s, whether you're up till today, music companies are always looking for that. How can I manufacture this art on an assembly line in every era? We can pick out like the artists that were the assembly line folks, and it's why it's important to pay attention to the underground. Like popular mainstream music is always going to be like that. It's what are your underground alternative? What is your underground blues? What are your underground jazz? What are these people who do well and then who rise to the top? Like I said, mainstream's always going to try to manufacture music. That's always its game, and it's whichever comes up from the underground and whatever, like as Shannon says, sticks out. And like I said, the example that I was going to pull up was Greta Van Fleet. Like they came out of nowhere. I saw them at Stage AE in Pittsburgh for $42. Within 90 days after that moment, all their tickets were going for $500, and they were on Saturday Night Live, and they were doing all this stuff. So it's just really interesting to see when you find that artist that kind of sticks out and breaks through. That's pretty cool. But it's like, what who are you following? That's kind of the underground, or just not at that mainstream level where it's just nuts. That's just.
Do any of you guys follow Rick Beato on YouTube or anything?
I do not.
So Rick Beato is a producer. He's an amazing guitarist. He's well versed in music. He knows everything about composition. He's obviously a wizard with several different instruments as well as the recording board. But he was talking recently about one of his bands. He couldn't understand why they didn't make it. Well, the reason they didn't make it, it was a continuation of what I call the hair grunge, like Tonic, where they're just whining about everything that's done wrong to them, and it's formulaic, and it's in drop tune, and it sounds like every drop tune ever band that ever was. And he recorded it. He showed examples of it, and it was recorded perfectly. It could have been released in 1997, and it would have made it, but that stuff is just so depressing, and it doesn't have any energy, and they forgot why Nirvana made it, and that was the energy of it. And even Soundgarden, and especially the whole whimsical side somehow through all the distortion that was Pearl Jam, the whole art coming out through it, right?
Don't forget STP, goddammit.
And STP, they tried to be hard rocking, they tried to be Led Zeppelin.
Fuck you, Cole.
They try to be big, right?
I can't
They try
wait
to be
till we
huge.
have the Steely Dan episode. That's going to be my very favorite one.